Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be showing you how to install Arch Linux to a system with UEFI. And the reason that I'm doing this is because there are a gajillion how to install Arch Linux on YouTube. And I found very little to none on how to install it to a UEFI system, and I find that kind of odd because most modern systems come with UEFI by default, and I would think that I would have thought there'd be more material on this, but so anyway, I will be installing this to a VirtualBox. I have UEFI enabled, and I will do a separate video showing how to do that, and I will make a separate video showing how to make
drive, so
your USB stick bootable,
so you don't end up wiping your data.
But this isn't a VirtualBox, and when you boot into Arch Linux, this is the first screen you're gonna see. Is just a blank screen with nothing but a command line. Arch Linux is built up manually from the ground up, and so we're going to be going through that today. And I gave this virtual machine, so without further ado, let me get myself out of the way. Okay. So, as you can tell, I gave this virtual machine 10 out of my 32 gigs of RAM, and so there should be no issues with this resource-wise. Okay, so we're just gonna hop right in here. A good way to find out whether you're booted into EFI is to hit EFI var L. If this shows anything at all in this in here, you're booted into EFI mode. So, what's the first thing that we're gonna do? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare our disks. The first thing you should do maybe is to find out if you're connected to the internet, because this is going to require downloading some packages. You're going to want to be online. If you're not online, what you could do, I would recommend using a wired connection. If you can. If you cannot, if you're on a laptop and you absolutely need Wi-Fi, you can hit Wi-Fi menu. It's not recognizing any wireless interfaces because this is in a virtual machine. This isn't a virtual box. So, yeah. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do after we tested our internet connection is we're going to set up our partitions. And the way that we do that is we have to find out what disks are on our system, and I gave it 150 gigs of virtual hard disk, and it's SDA is the disk that we're looking for. Now this part is very important. You want to make sure you get this right. You want to make sure you get the right disk, because once you do this, it's going to be completely wiped clean. And so it's very important that you get this right, and that you're not, end up wiping out your whole system, all your data. So, how do we do this? The first thing we want to do is make sure that it's completely clean. So we're going to hit gdisk dev SDA. By the way, all these things to access the disk, you want to hit, they're all located in the dev folder. As you can tell, this is where they, I guess Linux likes to mount drives. So it would help if I could spell. But anyway, here we're gonna just hit gdisk dev sda, and we're gonna hit X for advanced options, Z for zap. Now, this is your last warning. After you run this, everything on that drive is gonna be gone. Okay, now we have a clean disk. So the next thing we're going to do is hit cg disk. Dev sda. Press any key to continue. Yes. And so you're going to be met with this. And you're going to hit new. There's no partitions on this yet. New. And we're going to make our boot partition right now. We're going to make it 1 gigabyte. Right? I mean, some wikis say it only has to be like 500 megs, but I like to give it at least a gig for some wiggle room. You want to make sure that you give it the hex code EF00. Some guides might say to put it as EF02. Do not do that. It will not boot into UEFI if you put it as EF02. EF00 is your hex code that you want for that. We're going to name it boot. Okay, so the next is you want to give it a swap space. You probably noticed that I hit enter on the first one for the last one too. You want to do that to make sure that it starts on the first available sector of your hard drive. And so for the swap space, there's going to be much disagreement over whether or not people should even use swap space anymore, given how much system resources modern computers have. However, if you have a lower end machine especially, you're going to want to give yourself at least some swap space. The guide says here if you have 2 gigabytes of RAM or less, 2 times the amount of RAM, 3 times the amount of RAM. If you have 2 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes of RAM, you're going to want to make it equal to the amount of RAM. 8 to 64 gigs, make it 0.5 times the amount of RAM. I gave this virtual machine 10 gigs of RAM out of my 32 gigabytes on my host system. So I doubt that it's going to really run into any issues. However, I will give it 8 gigabytes of swap space just for the sake of the tutorial. Give it the hex code 8200 for swap space, and we're going to name it swap. Okay, so now we have the boot partition, swap partition, and then down here we're going to dedicate the rest of the drive to the root partition, and we can keep everything here as the defaults. And you want to name it root. And so now once we got that all set, you want to hit write. Are you sure you want to write the partition table to disk? Yes or no? Yes, we want to write that. And now you have your partition table. Now quit. Clear. Okay, so the next step, we need to let Linux know the file system for our partitions. For EFI with GPT, the boot needs to be FAT32. So the boot partition needs to be FAT32 as a format. So the way we're going to do that is we can hit lsblk you get a list of your partitions here. You have SDA1, SDA2, SDA3. Those are the partitions that you have on that hard drive. And if you have multiple disks, they will show up here as possibly SDB2, SDB, or I'm sorry, SDB, SDC, SDD, so on and so forth. Again, it's very important that you get the right disk when you're formatting these things to make sure you don't, wipe out all your data. So anyway, the boot partition we have is SDA1 in this case. So we're gonna say make mkfs vfat dev SDA1 or whatever your boot partition is going to be. Okay, so we're going to hit, so the next thing we want to do is make our swap partition. So we're going to hit SDA mk swap /dev /SDA2. And we want to turn the swap on SDA2. And that turns on the swap. So we could check to see if this is running by running the top command, a basic system resource monitor, and you could look down where it says in the top corner there MIB swap. If that says anything, yeah, it's recognizing the swap space, and so we're good on that. It would help if I could spell once again. So the next thing we want to do is make our home directory, or in this case our root partition. We want to make that ext4. So we're going to hit mkfs.ext4 dev SDA3. And this could take a minute depending on how big your hard drive is. Okay, so it looks like that finished up pretty quick. And so we'll move on to the next command, and now we're going to want to mount a few drives. So the first thing we're going to do is mount dev SDA3 to MNT. Now MNT is like the main place where Linux tends to mount external drives. In this case, we want to mount it there. We want to make a few directories. We want to make directory mkdir mnt boot mnt home. And what this is going to do is it's going to make these two directories on the MNT folder, which is mounted to SDA3 right now. So it's going to put those directories on that drive. So we want to make sure we get that done. Now we want to mount dev SDA1 to MNT boot. And it's very important that we get these mounts correctly as well. SDA3 MNT home. Okay, so now we can test to see if these things are mounted correctly. They have. As you can tell, when you type in lsblk, it gives you a list and it shows you what they're mounted to, if anything. And so we have everything working just fine now, so we're going to hit clear, and we're going to move on to the next step here. There used to be a step where you would have to go in and choose your mirrors. Basically, your mirror list is a list of servers where you're going to get your software from, or your packages. Usually you want to pick the ones that are closest to you. And there used to be a step where you'd have to where you could rank the mirrors. It would take like 15 minutes. However, I noticed in the recent months that the Arch, here, let me pipe that through less. The Arch community, for whatever reason, decided to not comment to enable, in other words, enable all of the mirrors. As far as it goes, these days I usually leave it alone. I've had no issues updating. I've had no issues finding packages this way. And the way I see it, having a ton of backup servers is not a bad thing to have. So I'm just going to leave the mirror list alone for now. I mean, you can look up how to choose your servers if you want. I'm just going to leave that as is. The next step is we want to install the base system, the base of the operating system. This is going to install the kernel and a few other tools that we're going to need to have a basic working Linux system. So to do that, we're going to hit packstrap tac I to make sure that it asks for confirmation, /mnt, and we're going to install base and the base devel. Hit enter for default, and Y for yes. And now this could take a while, so I'm just going to pause the recording here and or not. I'll let it go. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to go through this as detailed as I can to explain what's happening and what's going on. The reason I'm doing this in a virtual box is obviously so that I can record it. But these commands would be identical on a main system, and you might just have to do a few extra steps depending on your hardware. If you have an NVIDIA, if you have a Broadcom chipset, you're going to want to make sure you install that. Make sure to install the DKMS version of those drivers if you're using Arch Linux, because if you don't, it will break every kernel update and make your system completely unbootable. But yeah, as long as you don't have any like crazy wacky hardware, like the Broadcom chipset, most of this should be like pretty stable for you. And yeah, I mean, the installation process for Arch is a learning curve. It's a bit different from what you're probably used to, having a point and click installation. However, and it was a learning curve for myself as well. However, once I got the hang of it, once I learned about the AUR and how to use all that stuff, I don't know, I got hooked. I never thought that I would settle on Arch and stop distro hopping on something like Arch, but I did. It is what it is. Okay. So this has just installed the base system, which means you have like the kernel. You can run basic commands in it now. However, there's one more step that we have to do right now. We have to generate the fstab. Now this is very important that you type this in exactly the way I am. Gen fstab tech u tech p mnt. Now this part is very important. Make sure you hit two of the forward of these greater than signs. Make sure it's two of them, because what this is gonna do, if you type in 1, what this does is it basically forwards the output of a data into a file instead of displaying it on the screen. If you type in 1, it completely overwrites a file and makes a new one. If you hit 2 of them, it appends it. It puts whatever is you're doing onto the bottom of the already existing file. And you want to make sure that you get this right, because if you're not, you're going to end up overwriting important files, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that this is going to append it and not overwrite it. So and we can check to see if this went. You could the cat command. This stands for catalog, and what this does is it will display for you the contents of a text file or the like. So here, and we have the contents. That is correct. That's what we're supposed to have. So we're just gonna hit clear. I like to have a blank slate every now and again. So there we go. So now we're gonna chroot into the system itself, and what that means is we're gonna access into our newly installed Arch Linux, and we're gonna configure some things. To do that, you hit arch chroot mnt, and now we're in our new Arch Linux system. But before we can use it as a main system, there are some things we have to do. We have to set our locale. In this case, I'm going to locale.gen. Nano is like a basic text editor that runs in the terminal. So that's what we're going to use here. We're just going to hit nano etc locale.gen. We're going to go in here, and this is where you choose your keyboard layouts. For me, it's English US.utf. So I'm just gonna. What you're gonna want to do is find your keyboard layout in this file and remove the hashtag. Right, the hashtag. What it does is it comments out the lines, and the system just ignores anything with that hashtag in front of it. So I removed the hashtag from that one. So as far as the system is concerned, this line right now is the only line in this file. It's the only one it's going to recognize. And so what we're going to do now is save that file. So we're going to hit Control O. That overwrites it. Hit Enter. It's been written. And to exit, you hit Control X. So now we have our locale set. Now it's time to generate it. So hit locale -gen. And now we have to set it as our language. So we hit echo lang. And we're going to pipe it, or sorry, we're going to forward it to locale.conf. And all this does is when you hit echo, that's what it does. It echoes whatever you type afterwards. And so your echo in this is going to repeat that, and it's going to send it to this file here. Notice I only used one greater than sign. That means that it's either going to create this new file or it's going to overwrite whatever's there. As for that's all we really need in that file, so I'm just going to do that. We want to hit export and make sure that this gets set as a environment variable. And make sure you replace this with whatever your locale is if yours isn't English. The next step is we're going to set the time zone. To do that, you could check to see what they have for time zones. The ls command is list, right? It lists what's in your current directory. In order to find out what you have for time zones, you want to hit ls user share zone info. And for me, my time zone is America, but America has a lot of different time zones, so you want to hit ls and check to see what options. As far as I go, my time zone is America, New York. So the way that you set the time zone is you want to set up a symlink. So you want to hit ln-s and you want to hit user share zone info America, New York. Now make sure you switch this for your time zone if it's different. I assume you know which time zone you're in. And you want to forward that to etc local time. Now we're going to set the hardware clock to UTC. And here's where we're going to set up the host name. This is going to be the name of your computer, the name that's going to show up on the networks. For me, I'm just going to name it Arch VBox. Yeah, Arch Virtual Box. And we're going to pipe that to etc host name. And we can check to see if that's in there by hitting catalog, cat for catalog, etc host name. And there are the contents of that text file. Right? So okay, so the next step is we're gonna have to edit the pacman.conf file. And the reason we're going to do this is to make sure that you can run 32-bit applications on your 64-bit system. If you don't enable this, you might run into some issues when you're installing certain things. I like to live dangerously, so I usually enable the testing repos. But if you're not inclined to do that, that's fine. But we want to go down here until you see multi-lib, and we want to uncomment that out. And from there, we're going to hit Control O to write it out, Control X to exit. Now we're going to hit Pacman SYY to resynchronize the databases. Okay. So the next step is you want to set a password for your root. So we're going to hit passwd, and this is going to ask us for the new password. I'm going to set up a new password that's definitely not Tor. Password is updated successfully. By the way, this is a virtual box. That's the only reason why I made the password weak. If you're installing this to your host system, obviously pick a complicated password. The next step is to add a regular user. So we're going to hit user add. Attack M to make a home folder. G, users. Group is the users. Add it to wheel. Storage. Power. Attack S. And we're going to give it the shell bash for that user. And I'm going to make this user. Now we're going to give it a name. This is going to be a username. I'm just going to name it Archbox. Or, yeah. I'll name it Archie. So the next step, you want to change the password for your new user. Okay, so now we want to set up sudoers, and the reason you want to do this is to make sure that your normal user can run root level commands. So we're going to hit editor equals nano vsudo, and the reason we're going to do this is it's just going to be editing a text file. But this text file is going to tell the system who is allowed to perform root actions or super user actions, and we want to keep going until we find this line here. It says wheel all. You want to uncomment that. Again, Control O to save it, Control X to exit. Now we're going to install the bootloader. Now I do things a little bit more differently than most other people might on their systems. I know most people choose to use grub. However, when I learned how to install Arch on the UEFI system, the guide that I used had me use the bootctl, or the bootloader that I think it's built right into systemd. It's worked for me. I've had no issues with it, and it's pretty much what I use. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. But first, I'm going to install bash completion. By the way, all you need to do to install a program or an app on Arch Linux is pacman, capital S, and the package that you're looking for. So you hit Y. It's going to ask you if you want to proceed. Yes. And bash completion is just going to make our life a lot more easier down the road. However, right now we're going to hit Mount T, UEFI var fs EFI var fs sys firmware EFI vars, and this is gonna come back and say mount sys already mounted. That's good. That's what we want. We want it to be mounted there. So, and doing that is just to check to see if it's already there. So the next step is we're just gonna install the bootloader. Bootctl install will take care of that. And the next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make the we're going to have to manually write the entries file. So we're going to do nano boot loader entries. We're going to name it arch.conf. And this is going to open up with a file. I type in title, arch, Linux, VM, Linus, Linux, init, rd, init, ram, fs. Make sure you type this in correctly, because if you don't, your system will not boot. It'll give you an error message saying I can't find yada yada yada, and it's usually something wrong with this file here. So usually this is like, this was the biggest mistake I made when I first installed it, was I mistyped something here, and I had to go back in and tweak it. And so like, just make sure you get this correctly. So I'm gonna hit Control O to write it out once again, Control X to exit. And now that's saved. Now there's one more line that we're going to have to add to that file. Possibly more if you're on an Intel system. We'll get to that in a second. However, there's a command here that will write that file, write that line for you. And the reason we're going to do it this way is because convenience. It's kind of a long command, but it works. I'm going to hit echo. Make sure you use the quotation marks exactly the way I write them. Options root equals part UUID. See, the reason we're doing this is to make sure that the system finds our system and recognizes it as bootable. O value, and this is going to be the drive where your home folder is located. So make sure you know where your home folder or your root partition is, and make sure you get that one right. RW quotation marks. Now make sure two greater than signs. We're going to want to append it, not overwrite it. Loader entries arch not conf. And just look at that again, make sure I got it all typed out correctly. Bada bing, bada boom. Now we can check it. By the way that I get to the command I just punched in, arrow keys, up and down. Goes through your command history. And so I'm just gonna delete that and go catalog. See that it wrote that last line, and as you can tell, that's why I wanted to do it via that command, is because otherwise that's how you get the output for that very long number, which if you would have, otherwise you would have had to have remembered that whole number and type it in manually. So that's why I did it the command way. So we're just going to clear that. Now, if you're on an Intel-based system, you're going to want to install an extra package called Intel ucode. If you're on an AMD system, this doesn't really matter. You can ignore this part. However, if you're on Intel, you're going to want to do this. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. And so what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to have to add another line to this one here, and it's going to go just after this line here. We're going to hit init rd intel ucode .img. Write it out. Control exit to get out of there. Would help if I could spell once again. Couple extra steps. You want to hit Pac-Man. We now want to install the network manager. Y, yes. And this is just going to enable networking. Eventually we are going to install a GUI onto this system. I'll save that for another video so that I can maybe go through step to step how I use i3 as my window manager and like how I configure it. And Pacman is good. It finds all of the dependencies for a package that you're going to install. So far I found it to be one of the best package managers out there. Second maybe only to Portage on Gentoo's package manager. But yeah, here we go. And I'm going to pause the recording here. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do is if you're on a wireless system, if you need Wi-Fi when you reboot it, there are a couple of other packages you're going to want to install. One of them is Dialog, WAP supplicant. Yes. And this is just to make sure that when you reboot into your installed system that you can run Wi-Fi menu. Oh, looks like WPA supplicant already installed. Oh well, no big deal. Well, at this point, you should be able to unmount your system and reboot into your newly installed Arch Linux. Okay, so right now I'm going to exit. We're going to exit back into the live environment. From here, you want to make sure to unmount. And we're going to recursively MNT. And now, hopefully, it reboots into a fully installed system. And boom, you are in. This is it for the first installation. You're only going to have a command line. Okay. Okay, so there was one thing that I forgot to do. Now it's to enable DHCP on my wired connection. You're going to want to do this so that you automatically connect to the network after you reboot. To do that, you hit sudo systemctl enable DHCP at your interface. And to find out your interface IPA, and you go down here and you'll see NP0S3. Yours might be a little different than mine, but for that one's mine. And again, it's enable DHCP, so I'm just going to reboot that again so that it connects back to my So sometimes it could take a while for it to boot. It was stated in the guides or whatever that with UEFI mode enabled on a virtual box, it could boot. It could take a lot longer to boot. On a host machine though, it would take like all but 2 seconds, really, like the initial boot. But here, I'm just gonna. Okay, so I've rebooted it again. This time with DHCP enabled. And again, this is all you're gonna get in your initial boot is a command line. Like I said before, everything is built up from the ground up. So we're just gonna make sure that I have internet now. And I do. So yeah. Okay. So for the part 2 right now, I'm gonna show how to install a graphical user interface or a GUI in some cases. A few packages you're going to want to install. You want to start by installing Mesa, which is probably already installed. You want to install the Xorg utilities. Xorg is what I guess the GUI, most GUIs run off of. It's like basically the back engines of it. So Xorg, and you're gonna want to install. Make sure to install all of this: TWM, Xorg, and Xterm. And this is all just the basic to get it up and running. And you can read the Arch Wiki to find out all the supported graphical interfaces that Arch Linux supports. There are a lot. You know, KDE, GNOME, the usual suspects. However, I'm going to choose to install i3 for this demonstration, and the reason I'm choosing that is because it's my main desktop window manager, and that way I can show how I configure it, how I get it to work on my system and everything. So this might take a while. Here, it's already finished. If you're on a laptop, Okay, so there is one thing that we're gonna do. I'm gonna change directory, go home, make sure I'm in the home directory. And the way you could do that is pwd, stands for print working directory. And it'll show you where you are. Directory is just like a command line word for folders, right? You're in a folder. You're in a directory. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna get you access to the AUR, which, if you're unfamiliar with the AUR, it's a community-driven. It stands for Arch User Repository, and it's a vast, huge, it's a community-maintained repository. And so, like, you have, I think, like 3 or 4 main repositories in Arch. They are vast, you know, as I said in one of my previous videos. Whoops, gotta install wget. Alright. We'll do this right this time, huh? Okay, so we're gonna install wget. Now this should work. We're gonna install a helper, a wrapper for the AUR. The first time we're going to install this, we're going to have to do it the Arch way, if you will. And what that means is we do exactly what I did here. We download the file manually. Gonna unarchive it. So tar xv zf yay tar.dg, and this is gonna unarchive it. And so now we want to change directory. CD stands for change directory, yay. And now the command that we're going to run here is make. This is how you would install a package from the AUR, the Arch way. We're going to hit make package csi, and now it's going to install it for you. It's going to find the dependencies for you and everything. I'm going to start by saying the AUR is a thing of greatness. I mean, if you can't find what you're looking for, well, what this does is the AUR, much of what you get in AUR is installed from source code. It's compiled from the source code. Some of it is, some of it isn't. Yeah. I mean, it is a learning curve to get used to dealing with repositories, package managers, and you know the AUR and whatnot. But in my opinion, once you get used to it, it makes life so much more convenient, so much easier. Where every piece of software you need would be one of two places, and whoops. Okay, so I installed Xorg. Now I'm going to install i3. So I'm going to go to the Arch Wiki, table of contents here. And what you could do here is sudo. You can run a search for package names. If you run sudo pacman tac capital S lowercase s in what you're looking for, in this case i3, whoops, it'll give you this list of available applications with that string in it. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to enable color for Pacman, and the way we're going to do that is etc/pacman.conf. And if you go down here, you're going to find a lot what's called miscellaneous options, and there are a few of these I like to enable. What color does is it adds some color to Pacman so you can more easily tell the difference between what you're looking at. Total download, what that does is instead of showing you the percentage of the current package you're downloading, it shows the overall total of all the packages it's downloading. So it would be like overall total. Verbose package list, that just shows more information on the packages when you're about to install them. There's one here that I like to enable. It's called I love candy. And what that does is it changes the little hashtags disappearing with Pac-Man eating his little pellets, you know, Pac-Man from the video game. So we're going to just write that out here, and I'll show you what I mean here. Sudo Pac-Man SYY. And you can see already there's color. There's more color, and you see Pac-Man going down the screen there. Doing his thing. That's just a little something you could do to spruce it up. Spruce up the command line, you know. Well, yeah, anyway. On to i3. There are a few packages we're going to want to install. Sudo pacman ss i3. And you can see, yeah, see the color makes it a lot easier to see, right? So we're going to hit pacman or sudo pacman. Always make sure you run this as a sudo. i3-gaps. I choose to use i3-gaps because I don't know, I just think the gaps make it look a lot prettier. Excuse me. i3 blocks. I'm going to install i3 blocks because that's what I use to get my applets, or you know, whatever you want to call them, widgets, you know. You're going to want to install i3 status. And it looks like that's it for now. Yeah. Oh yeah, we're going to want to install the Light Display Manager, so you can have a graphical login manager. And we're going to install something called Compton as well. So we're going to do sudo. And Compton is just a composite manager for i3. It just it helps with a lot of like screen tearing and like certain bugs that you might encounter. So we're just going to install Compton, Lightdm. And you're going to want to make sure to install Lightdm, GTK greeter. And we're going to install DM GTK greeter settings as well. Yeah, so next what you want to do is sudo. You want to enable the Lightdm greeter. Systemctl enable lightdm.service and create a symlink between them. And then you can run reboot. And that looks like it's just something that the VirtualBox is doing to me now. This is kind of my first time installing something as a UEFI on a VirtualBox. So, I mean, if you're installing in a real hardware, you won't run into a lot of the issues I'm bumping into here. But see how it booted up into a graphical login screen now. Oops. Here's a login screen that's definitely not Tor. And now it's going to ask me, you have not configured i3 yet. Do you want me to generate a config file at home.rgd? Yes. And enter for yes. I like to use enter as the mod key. So I'll hit enter. And this is the default i3 look. I think this is where I'm going to leave things for now. I'm going to show how I configure in the next video. But yeah, that's how I install a base Arch system with my i3 window manager. Yeah, so that is how you install Arch Linux on a UEFI system. And I get i3, basic vanilla i3. That's how it looks out of the box when you first install it. On my next video, or perhaps excuse me, or perhaps I will do it live. I will configure i3 to make it look pretty, make it look, the way I get it to look like this. Okay, so yeah, be sure to comment, subscribe if you like the video. And I look forward to seeing your comments in Alright, thank you and have a great day.